Hello, everyone. This is episode 19 of the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time viewing, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, and I thought I might indulge myself this week because I've been studying a book. I probably mentioned it before. I've been studying a
I think you
book.
have, yes.
Yes, yes. I've been studying a book called How to Be an Anti-Capitalist in the 21st Century by Eric Olin Wright,
Mm,
and
mm.
I'm in the process of doing a video essay of it, and I thought maybe with this podcast episode, I can talk through my ideas for it because it's surprising how in 150 pages this guy does really well to condense a democratic anti-capitalist world and how it
Mm,
can be achieved
mm,
starting from day dot to now. Because when I've been looking at socialism, yeah, a lot is talked about, hey, once we capture the means of production and, once the dust settles, then we can build a socialist society. I kind of feel like this guy, Eric Olin Wright, discusses, hey, from day dot, from a capitalist market economy, right here, right now, what are the philosophies that an anti-capitalism can take in order to get from day dot to a more democratic society?
yep,
And it kind of takes us through that kind of line of thinking.
yep.
And I guess for the listeners and the viewers, what I mean by anti-capitalism, or more specifically, what Eric Olin Wright means by anti-capitalism, is well, basically the complete opposite of what capitalism is, and what he says or how
Well,
he
wait,
defines.
well, what is capitalism then?
I was about to go into that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
his notion of what capitalism is so it's a it's a market economy, and it's a ideology of that is very loosely based on the original French terms of fraternity, liberty,
Mm,
and
mm,
like basically those sort of concepts, but it's almost stripped to the bone. So like he does kind of touch on neoliberalism and how
mm, mm,
there's a big show of, hey, we actually do believe in these ideas, but when you
mm.
actually scratch the surface just a little bit,
Yeah,
um, it's very hollow.
yeah.
And
Look, I think it's a hard thing to define.
mm,
And I think it's important that we do talk about what it is to be an anti-capitalist. But before we do that, we really need to nail down, as best we can, what capitalism is. And you've raised free markets or market ideology,
mm,
which I think is central. But many people always bring up the idea, oh, there's always been markets, and there's always been money and stuff like that. So
mm,
haven't we always been capitalists, but just maybe a different form of capitalism? Or capitalism has always been around, man. All that
mm,
sort
mm,
of rhetoric that you hear, and at on face value of when you first hear it, it does take you back because we see the world in a certain way today in the 21st century, and we're so used to money and living in market societies that we
mm,
can't really imagine the world any other way. And the way that we're indoctrinated in the system with all the propaganda that is thrown at us all the time, and the fact that we're just surrounded by consumerism and advertising and all that sort of stuff, we really can't imagine life where you don't actually exchange some form of currency, whether that be imaginary or real in the form of
mm,
cash or using your credit card to actually make life work and see all the things around us.
mm,
And so yeah, there might have been forms of exchange out there and there might have been marketplaces, but
mm,
capitalism is quite unique in the sense that it is, for me, comes down to absolute fundamentals. So it is about free market exchange based on those liberal principles that you were talking about
mm,
before that, came out of the American Revolution, the French Revolution,
mm,
or they culminated actually in those events. They
mm,
were in the background working their way through society, through bourgeois culture for a long
mm,
time. But like they are the things that you're talking about: liberty, equality,
mm,
and then property. And property is really the cornerstone of capitalism, right
mm,
there, in the sense of private property. So that is being able to own and control exclusively property in which you invest in to make money. I'm not talking about personal property. I'm talking about things like you said before that are
mm.
like the means of production, things
Yeah.
that will make a return. And that's what capitalism is about and what separates it from any other form of society. There's lots
Yeah.
of societies where they had cash and they paid workers and all that sort of stuff, or they had marketplaces and they traded goods and all this sort of stuff. But in capitalism, the idea, and like, this is very much a Marxist
Mm.
analysis, but I don't think
Yeah.
people really dispute this too much,
Mm.
especially, I guess, in revolutionary radical and leftist circles. But
Mm.
it is the formula: money, commodity to money, and
Mm.
the output money being larger than the original input money. Most
Mm.
market systems or societies with some level of exchange and
Yeah.
trade and all that sort of stuff go commodity money, commodity. You start off with a commodity and you exchange that for money so you can pull out a commodity in the end. But
Mm.
like capitalism specifically is having money, so
Mm.
capital. Most of the time, it's a
Yeah.
capital. It starts with a money form capital, and you put that into a system somehow to make a commodity or trade with a commodity or bet on a commodity, if you will, somehow. And then you pull out more money
Mm.
than you put in the first place. And so thereby a key feature of capitalism compared to anything else, because you might have money to see money, commodity money exchange in other systems, fine. But the key component of capitalism is that it requires continual growth. And that is a
Yes.
big criticism of capitalism at all
Mm.
times, because in order for you to have money here and pull out more money there, the system has to keep growing.
Yes.
It has to come, like stuff has to come from somewhere. And that is a massive criticism that I'm sure we're going to get to when we actually start talking
Mm.
about the anti-capitalism, is the fact that for some reason, and this is just widely accepted by everyone, that, well, it is just actually a fact that in order for capitalism to really to work, you need continual growth. And
Mm.
like, it's 3%, I think, is the magical number that thing by which things like naturally will grow by.
Mm.
Or like they want at least 3% growth, like, on a national scale or globally, whatever, to have a healthy capitalist system going. So, you know, people are inputting stuff at the start and pulling out
Mm.
more, and there's always got to be extra money and extra stuff being
Mm.
pumped into the system. And so like capitalism by design or by its very nature leaves nothing uncommercialized or
Mm.
unmarket, becomes like everything becomes marketized in a way. There's nothing left sacred on planet Earth anymore. Everything will succumb to the market, which is the neoliberalism that you were talking about
Yeah.
before. Like before, there were limitations on capitalism in the liberal ideology or the liberal way of doing things,
Yeah.
because they believed in something. Neoliberalism, forget it. Like, that's it. It's just everything is open to the market now to expand capital at all costs, because it's
Mm.
reached a point where it's just this uncontrollable beast now at a global scale, and it's just devouring everything
Mm.
in its path, really. And so, yeah, capitalism is like it's hard to really put your finger on what it is, but if you can try and draw it back to those fundamentals, then like you've got some form of a building block, but it's everything in there and so much more.
You raised a really good point because the whole, commodity to money to commodity, but then capitalism has extended that to commodity, money to money. So that was very interesting because um, let's look at the most recent crisis that everyone points to. Okay, the second one, because obviously I'm not considering the pandemic here. I'm
Mm,
considering 2008 global financial crisis. What
mm,
can that be summarized? And that can be summarized in one word: speculation. And that structure that Marxist structure, that Das Kapital structure that you were focusing on before, all about speculation. So, okay, let's hit a little bit closer to home. Um, Speculation on, if you look at the United Nations and their Charter of Human Rights, housing. Now, here in Australia, and I'm sure this is the case in everywhere else, um, the Australian dream, as opposed to the American dream, is, hey, owning your own home, and settling down with your kids, and just having enough so you can kind of relax for the rest of your life. However, if you create a speculative market in housing where people are encouraged based on negative gearing, based on capital gains, in order to get an investment property so they can go to their tax accountant and do the necessary debits and credits and tax avoidance in order for you to get the most amount of bucks, and forcing other people that are only in the rental market so you can basically pass on it. Like, so for example, if there's any sort of interest rate rises, you can pass on those charges to your renters. And that creates a situation where it creates a bubble where it's almost expanding, expanding, expanding. And
mm.
then when that bubble bursts, the housing prices immediately go down when your mortgages haven't. That's speculation, and that's just a problem waiting to happen.
Yes, yes, and that's a key component and an inbuilt function of
Mm,
capitalism kind of thing. It's crisis prone, contradictory nature, that because it continually seeks something which, nothing is kind of infinite on this planet anyway. Like
mm,
kind of thing. I guess if capitalism expands out into the universe, then fair enough. We've got a whole other ball game here. But while we're trapped on Earth, yeah, capitalism in and of itself is self-defeating. It causes these, and it has these ebbs and flows, but because it's continually seeking something that is not there right now, and it needs to expand forever.
mm.
It will collapse in on itself, and it is full of problems.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing about the ideology behind capitalism as well, because
Mm,
I don't think people actually understand that capitalism is all about growth and continual growth. They
mm,
just believe in that on these kind of important liberal principles, which were the ideas that you're talking about
mm,
earlier, being liberty, so freedom to
mm.
act in the
Yeah.
market, equality. So when you have a market exchange, you usually talk about things being done in the free market world between
Mm,
equals. So even if you have like a boss and an employee situation, right, which
yeah.
usually you would say they're not equals, but in the market, they come together as equals. So you have the boss, benevolent boss, just trying to get by and make his
Mm,
business work, just lovely dude all round. And you have a worker who comes to them as an equal and says to them, I will, on this contract basis, on, whatever basis it is, sell you my labor time. Basically, I'll work for you for a price. And so that's what there's this free market fantasy out there that's built around this idea of equality, because, you know, wage workers have a choice. They come to the
mm.
boss looking for work, and they agree to, a cost that suits them, because they're just so valuable, and like they just are able to walk around and just trade their value like this commodity, basically.
Mm.
But on an equal playing field. And like we just
Yes.
know that's just absolute crap, really,
Mm.
because there isn't an equal playing field, and most people don't get to just bargain with their boss and get everything suited to them and have the most perfect conditions and wages and all that sort of stuff. There's just not that
Mm.
type of equality, but fundamentally it is built on that idea of two equals coming together in the
Yes.
marketplace and having an agreement. And that's the equality side of things.
Mm.
And then there's the property side of things, which
Mm.
I was like saying before is the cornerstone, I think,
Yeah.
of capitalism is private property. Yes, private property has existed in terms of, people have had property and stuff like that, and then they've kept it privately, fine. But
Mm.
private property really today in the market economy is about the means of production.
Mm.
And with the means of production is like, it's propagandized and it's kind of tarnished, that word now. When people hear it, they're like, "Ooh," like, oh, this is some type of weird economic theory, and then they switch off. But like, let's just be honest, it's just whatever contributes to the wealth that is made up in a
Mm.
nation, which people
Yes.
refer to as GDP.
Yeah.
Okay. So anything that contributes to that, I think, is private property, unless it's like some type of government property, which is, I guess you could say collectively owned, but like, really the government is probably one of the largest private property owners in any given society. And they're influenced by corporations anyway, so it all feeds back into the system. But I digress. Private property really is just the things that make all the value in
Yeah.
society. So, like, whether that's a factory, the classic example, or
Yeah.
that's like somebody like you were talking about before, owning a rental property
Mm.
and renting that out to different types of people so they can get that rental income. It could be intellectual property rights or copyright because,
Mm.
someone comes up with this idea and they make it private. But like, if you want to use that copyrighted idea or that intellectual property, you have to pay them. So there's private property is something you invest in that
Mm.
brings you money. And like you have to ask the question, like with intellectual property or even like a factory or like any type of business, like an insurance company, anything like that is built on social infrastructure, so roads and highways, and they use water and electricity, things that have come together and been built and created by all these different people. Do they really
Mm.
get to control that, or should they control that privately to benefit off it when like there's all these people that come together to work for it and have contributed to it
Mm.
to make wealth out of that private property, but it's only in the hands of the people that own it. They get to decide what to do with it. And like,
Yes.
and now we're getting into anti-capitalism, I think, right?
Yes. I'm really happy you talked about all of that because it set up nicely what I was about to talk about. So, anti-capitalism is basically a within the system that we've just been talking about, fragmented in fragments. There actually are little pockets of various people that fundamentally, when there is something that capitalism promotes itself to be, there's always going to be an oppositional force that actually exposes, hey, capitalism, you're saying you're equal, you're saying that you're community based, you're saying that you're showing freedom, but actually, when you scratch below the surface, that's complete bull. And what anti-capitalism is basically these little pockets of social movements that basically fight against it. And what Eric Olin Wright focuses on is basically the 5 different types of movements that go into this. And he classifies them both as either class-based ones, so your typical Marxists, so a Marxist one where it's talking about, hey, there's the working class, there's the bourgeoisie, the people that are in charge of that private property. Give the people enough time. Once they develop a class consciousness, then they'll be able to seize the means of production. However, the downsides to, at least in the 21st century aspect of things, is that yes, you have people in trade unions like your nurses or your teachers, very clear that they're part of the working class. However, what about a sole trader that, owns his own utes, has an investment property, has his own house? If you start saying, "Hey, let's expropriate private property," he might be like, "Whoa, whoa, oh, what about my investment property?" So
It's a good point.
exactly, and there's these people that sit on the fence that they have an interest in what you're talking about, but they also have an interest in what the capitalists are talking about.
Yes, yes.
And then there's the other side of the fence, which is your moral value people. So let's take a recent example, hashtag free Assange. So those sort of people that are very much about protests and very much about, hey, there's this Australian journalist. He started WikiLeaks. He's done all these really great things in journalism and exposing corruption and exposing war crimes. Why are people trying to jail him? Like,
is it true that the current Australian Prime Minister actually called for the US to just like back down on it?
Well, I guess we're going into current politics here in Australia.
Just to quickly sideline the real chat for a minute, but is it true? Like you would know, I think that you're down with this. Like he called for the US to back off, right?
Yeah. If I remember correctly, it was one of the Teals that stood up in question time this week and said and asked him directly, "Hey, there are efforts to free Assange. Can we get can you say 100% that this is true?" And I think he was trying to walk the tightrope, but because obviously he's going up against the US. But he effectively said yes.
Wow. Sorry to just divert a bit, but it's monumental. Like it's
I was surprised myself. I thought he would have towed the line, but Albo making waves. But sorry, my train of thought. Yes.
Yeah, apologies.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like we can talk about the Free Assange movement where you obviously have the protesters and maybe they might be handing out pamphlets and they'll try to give a pamphlet to someone and someone just swats them away being like, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but how does that affect me? And to be honest, that's probably a decent point as well. So you have this great divide where whatever the movement is trying to do when it's in these broad camps, there are probably decent arguments against them. And what Eric Olin Wright is trying to do is, well, how do we bring these all together to make something that creates an anti-capitalist world, something that's more democratic? And so he investigates, up until this point, the 5 different types of movements. So there's your romantic version, one that we talk about quite a lot, mystery, smashing capitalism. So your Marxists, your anarchists, basically the Rosa Luxemburgs, the Lenins, the
revolutionary
Marxists.
Socialists.
Exactly. The ones that want to create a great rupture in society and to change the system by taking it over. Now, what I can understand from a day dot perspective why Eric took this way, but he basically was like, "Hey, we've been there, done that. There's too many moving parts with creating ruptures within systems, and then they end up not quite working out the way people wanted it to. So if we want to start and do something more democratic, we might have to shelve that kind of revolutionary idea. Whether you agree with that or not, I'll leave that up to the viewers or the listeners. But he basically says, hey, it's an idea. It's definitely an idea that we've visited in the past. And if we want to build a more democratic society, let's explore different avenues. Then he talks about the more reformist idea, which definitely took prominence in, the early parts of the 20th century, which was dismantling capitalism. So this was the idea of, hey, all we need to do is put an anti-capitalist progressive party in politics within the state, take it over, and as long as it stays in for a very, very long time, it'll be able to change the system to make things a lot more agreeable to an anti-capitalist
And look,
world.
I think there's some truth to that. Like,
Yeah,
like there's like we're talking about like social democracy here, right?
yeah,
Social
yeah.
democrats and stuff like that. They get in there, they have progressive policies that seek to curb the unrestrained free market kind of ideology that reigns supreme and try to claw back some of, I guess, there's that wealth creation that like we're talking about in the hands of private
Mm,
property. They like to share some of that out, right, with some
mm.
social spending, whether it be social infrastructure or welfare programs, healthcare,
There
like
is a difference. There is a difference, but this dismantling capitalism was very much the old school, hardcore Rosa Luxemburg type
mm, mm,
socialist parties. And
mm,
what at least within a movement within itself, the reason it became dead and buried, according to Eric Olin Wright, was you had situations like Chile where a very popular socialist party would get in, and then you would have a military coup
mm.
backed by a certain country that we know backs right wing fascist regimes to create military coups.
That's it's
Um,
so interesting, isn't it? Like they are so
and
contradictory. Like it's just it's amazing.
but basically, if a socialist party came into prominence, it would somehow be overthrown. So this kind of way of dismantling capitalism was was basically abandoned, and
Mm.
this is where you were talking about. So this is your modern politics take, which is
Okay.
taming capitalism. Now, taming
Right, right.
capitalism, the difference between dismantling and taming is, well, hey, we kind of just want to keep the status quo. Capitalists, you can do what you want in terms of doing creating your profits and everything, but we're going to have to put in regulations to make
Mm,
sure that you don't kill everything.
mm.
So it's, put in regulation so we can build towards battling climate change. Let's put in regulations that you actually pay your workers well enough so they don't starve. Like it's that where it's
It's that's a funny point too, isn't it?
yeah.
Because like you know from reading something like Das Kapital that like even the capitalists at one point there was without the regulation they even thought that they were doing too much in like mid 19th century England, and they were like, oh, maybe we shouldn't kill our workforce entirely because we might not have them in a generation. So like even capitalists like have kind of this built mechanism at some point where they're just like, oh, okay, enough is enough. I guess we might have to stop using children and killing them in like in horrendous labor conditions and stuff like
Mm,
that. So like I think it is interesting that that's almost a natural feature of capitalism itself, this kind of reformation, if you
yes.
will.
Also, it's good thing that you kind of bring that up because I was actually reading a book by this journalist, Tomorrow's Capitalism,
Mm,
and it's basically talks about the ideas of stakeholder capitalism,
mm,
where basically in the 2010s you have the rise of the activist CEO. So this is basically where a lot of your CEOs and your big companies in America have jumped on the idea of making sure that they're sustainable,
yeah,
that they
yeah,
are fighting climate change.
yeah,
And it's basically all the sexy stuff
yeah, yeah,
where it's like, oh, look at us listening to our shareholders, but also to our staff. And
yeah, yeah,
whether they're actually making a difference,
yeah,
again, I'll leave that to the viewer or the listener.
yeah.
But that's also taming capitalism, as you're
Mm,
referring to before.
mm,
And
mm,
then that's the more state-based stuff.
mm, mm,
Um, the more boots on the ground, average Joe ones is resisting capitalism.
Mm.
So that was what I was talking about before in terms of protests. So, for example, if a government were to put in a regulation that people see as anti-democratic or at least against people's interests, then boots on the ground, people will bring up
they will resist.
Yeah, they'll resist.
Direct action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
civil disobedience. Yeah.
But whether that's within a company or whether that's within like the government brings out a legislation that people don't like. But obviously you can only take that thus far because people are only roused into a certain issue and then they kind of die down again once that issue is resolved. Like you can't really take that further. And then the fifth idea that he discusses, which is the more current one, which is escaping capitalism. Now, this is much more of your typical ideas of cooperatives that I've talked about before. So instead of
and this is where things get really interesting for you, isn't it?
Yes.
Calm down. I can see you getting excited.
Yeah. So it's very good that you brought up the idea before of, hey, you go and get a wage, you get a salary from your boss, and they go to HR, and HR gives you the list of tasks that you're supposed to do. But the thing is, you can't go to your boss and say like, oh, hey, this other department, have you thought about doing this, this, and this? It might be good for the business. Your boss would just look at you and be like, mate, go back and do your job. What are you doing? Whereas a cooperative, or at least a worker-owned cooperative, is that the workers own the business. And to take the common phrase from Richard Wolff, Dr. Richard Wolff, Monday to Thursday, you go about your job, you do your particular task, and on Friday, you all have a big meeting during the day and you discuss about what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. And that sort of idea is escaping capitalism because from the ground up economically, you are creating economic democracy within the workplace, and you are trying to change the system in a different way. You are trying to escape from capitalism. And now you have these 5 different fragments. Now, what's interesting of what Eric Olin Wright does is he's like, okay, I want to take a bit of dismantling, I want to take a bit of taming, I want to take a bit of resisting, and take a bit of escaping and mix it all into a bowl and create eroding capitalism. Now, what he refers to as eroding capitalism is much like in nature, you have an ecosystem where and then you introduce a new species where it just so happens to kind of thrive in that environment. And if you work at it and that species works at it, and then suddenly it thrives, it then takes over that environment and thrives. It was a very weird metaphor, but he at least gets his idea across that if you kind of work at the idea of eroding capitalism, and you kind of pull in these different movements, they can actually gain traction. And the examples that he uses, which I'll go into in a sec, is peer-to-peer collaboration and the knowledge commons. So actually taking the components of what capitalism does and flipping it on its head. So the typical, at least he takes an old version and then he takes a new version. So the old version is your classic peer-to-peer collaborations. And this has already happened where basically turn the clock back 30 or so years. If you were to at least find out something like, oh, hey, so when did the Soviet Union fall? You would have to go to a specific encyclopedia that you bought and then troll your way through it to find that information. However, those encyclopedias are now non-existent because you just go to Wikipedia. And Wikipedia was basically this idea of people that were passionate about a certain topic. They would go in and basically write all the necessary information that they knew about a certain topic, and everyone would contribute to this topic. And it was peers collaborating on that, and therefore that old system of buying encyclopedias, it's basically non-existent now because people have chosen a labor of love in order to contribute to this community.
And so is that an analogy you're using for like an actual ground up contribution kind of model? Is that what you're...
Well, basically, I think not necessarily. It's just that I think Eric was just pulling in ideas of if you're able to kind of bring these concepts together, you can create an environment where you you can go back to the old ideas of liberty, fraternity, and like those sort of ideas where you can actually make them worthwhile, because people are focusing on community. People are focusing on, solidarity. People are actually focusing on things that are far more democratic.
And I think that's a really, really good point right there, that really the free market principles or the ideologies that come with liberalism, they are actually pretty bloody good. Like they have a lot of substance in and of themselves. Like liberty is a great idea, and actually having that as a free market kind of ideal it's wonderful. It doesn't happen in an actual free market system, though. You have monopoly and the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands as time goes on. Equality, it's fantastic. The idea that you could have two equals coming together in a market and having some form of equal exchange because they're both there out of their own volition and they want to contribute something and take something, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, but they actually are acting as equals. That just doesn't happen. But like, it's a nice principle. And then you have the idea of property, where you have people having ownership of something in order to create what is needed to, help us all, really. But like, you don't have to have that done privately. That can be done in a collaborative way in order to uphold the previous two ideals. And that's what I think, really, that like being anti-capitalist is, in a way. It's definitely what being socialist is, because it's in the word social. Like, I think if you really want to be a liberal, if you really believe in the free market ideologies, then you are naturally anti-capitalist, because capitalism has proven time and time again that while it seems to be based on those three principles, those liberal ideals, it has nothing to do with them, at least the first two anyway, liberty and equality. It has nothing to do with those. Actually, it uses those as tools to convince people it's actually something nice when it really actually isn't. It's just a form of control over the means of production, over controlling what it is that gives people the ability to produce things and take that for their sole benefit, and to use it, like I said, to actually just concentrate more power. And so like this anti-capitalist stuff, I think, is very interesting in, like, I think what you were saying when you were going through those five elements there, and I think maybe why you and the author have left the kind of the 4 and the 5 where you have at the end. You've gone through the obvious ones, or the ones that everyone are used to, but you've left some interesting ones at the end there, especially this idea of cooperatives. That is a very interesting idea, which I think is not played down. Well, it probably is played down, but it's overlooked a lot in revolutionary theory and just the general anti-capitalist movement because it's not flashy. It's not sexy like the other ones. It hasn't been tried like like it has been tried, but it hasn't been like sprayed across the globe as like as in your face as like the Soviet and the Russian Revolution, or communist China or Cuba or something like that. It's not as world changing, but it is
Yeah.
like a movement that starts from the ground up. And like if you go back to kind of Marxian kind of ideas, and like the root of kind of the current labor movement and the roots of the current revolutionary movements, the idea is that capitalism is its own gravedigger, and
Yeah.
within capitalism is the yoke of the socialist revolution and all that sort of stuff. And like those movements that are sexy and like in your face revolutionary are not particularly in line with that ideal. Like they don't come from this like slow developing yoke within capitalism that one day flourish and rise to take over. Like, but the cooperatives that you've described, that's the true potential of revolution. Because if capitalism came out of bourgeois culture, which was, this small and developing thing within the womb of like feudal society that flourished into what we have now, a system based on private property and free market exchange, i.e. capitalism, then if you had an anti-capitalist kind of embryo within capitalism that was developing, apart from, the resistance stuff, I guess, which is important, like that's on the ground and physically resisting, the other on the ground developing model is the cooperative, which is what you're talking. That is a literal antithesis of capitalism within the capitalist system. Like it's actually in there competing with other capitalist organizations and capitalism on the ground. And like from what you've told me about the cooperative movement and cooperative ideology, it's not just collaboration within the cooperative, it's collaboration with other cooperatives as well.
Yes.
And they tend to seek other cooperatives or really only deal with other cooperatives. And if that is the case, and let's just say hypothetically, it took off and 10% of all businesses starting, in the next 10 years across the globe were cooperatives that only dealt with other cooperatives. Like that could cavalcade in and snowball into something absolutely monumental and revolutionary.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because when people think of revolutions, they do think of your typical Leninist October Revolution ideas, but revolutions have happened before that people don't really focus on. And for example, let's go back a bit to neoliberalism. Now, neoliberalism before the 1970s was a complete joke. People did not take that concept at all seriously. But then,
it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think David Harvey picks up on that pretty well. It's funny, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry.
People did not take that concept seriously. And then Thatcherism happens and Reaganomics happens. And basically these great leaders go into their respective governments and at least embedded liberalism and Keynesianism was on the down low, where inflation was going up and all people were kind of losing their jobs, so they were able to revolutionize the system in order to battle against inflation, then get a roll on where they're basically going to different developing countries like your Mexicos, your Chiles, and debt trapping them and, getting rid of all of their workforces or basically turning their workforces into cheap labor so they can so the capitalists can basically offshore all of their production. And basically incentivize all the capitalists within the system.
Mm,
Um, People don't focus, but before neoliberalism came in, um, unions were very strong.
mm,
Keynesianism was thriving.
yeah,
Um, it was a revolution.
yeah. Yeah, see, I think we've actually talked about this before in private, actually. And yeah, it is revolutionary, but like I would say it's just stepping it up. So it's like the next stage of capitalism. It's a higher stage of capitalism in that it's still using the capitalist mode, but like it is revolutionizing it in a way. Because
Mm.
it's like it's stepping it up into fifth gear. Like you thought capitalism was good, wait until you see neoliberal capitalism. Like kind of
Yeah,
thing. It
yeah.
just completely has just destroyed like communities, ecosystems, populations around the world. It's just destroyed so much in its wake in the name of profit, and it's based on absolute speculation, which is the
Mm.
incredible
Well,
thing.
yeah.
It's because it's just now completely unleashed and unlimited. But like I would say it's the next development.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, it is revolutionary. I think I know the point that you're making, and it is, if to take it back, like not all revolutions are violent takeovers and stuff like that, and this
Mm.
culmination of like people just getting into this frenzy and deciding to burn it all down and start again kind of thing. There are things that happen like strategically and kind of boil over in other ways, and it's not just violent takeovers. It's like it's actually silent takeovers, like neoliberalism and stuff like that, where people in the right power and with the right influence get to just shift a system and a dynamic completely and just destroy what used to be the norm, like you were saying,
Mm.
like Keynesian economics and like strong union movements and solidarity
Mm.
and the working class and even the middle class having like this strong sense of ownership and influence
Yeah.
in the world and in politics. And like neoliberalism destroyed all of that completely. The only force in the world that has any influence at all is the corporation
Mm.
now. And yes, neoliberalism kind of revolutionized that, but like it just brought in, yeah, I would say the next phase of capitalism. But like let's have that hypothetical situation though, like because I don't think though that you can really separate the two. You have that like that
Mm.
progressive revolution that goes that builds up over time and leads to that kind of epic, climactic, kind of like violent kind of takeover and that violent struggle. And like that's why people were so like, especially like revolutionary theorists and socialists and all that, they were so surprised about the Russian Revolution because like, even Marx and like even Lenin and all that sort of stuff, they were just like, well, you can't have like socialism in Russia because like it's still technically like a feudal society. It's like
Mm.
it's a monarchy and stuff like that. They haven't Capitalism wasn't developed enough in
Mm.
Russia. Like most of it, it was just they were just rural populations and stuff like that. Like they believed that socialism would only come out of industrial capital and stuff like
Mm.
that. So they never believed that you could actually have the like a revolution in Russia anyway, because they hadn't gone through that whole like
Mm.
trajectory and development that would allow that revolution. They were really waiting for it to happen in Germany because that's where they thought all the action was because
Mm.
it was developed enough, or England because that was, that was developed enough.
Mm.
And so I think there's some truth to that because like it was a good effort and all that sort of stuff. I'm not discounting anything or I don't want to degrade any movements here or anything
Mm.
like that, but it it failed. Like the Soviet Union dissolved and it crumbled and stuff like that. So like it might have been premature. It might have just been a development or a practice run on the historical scale that is
Mm.
going to show us what happened. Like even like the bourgeois revolution and like
Mm.
capitalism stuff, it didn't just happen overnight or it didn't happen after the French Revolution or something like that. There were
Mm.
multiple revolutions or like struggles between that, or like on the way to that culmination.
Yes, because like I have read Leon Trotsky's memoirs on the Russian Revolution, and like There's the 1905 revolution.
Mm.
What? There's the February days, the April days, the May days, all the way leading up to the October Revolution. Like, it's amazing the amount of detail where there was ebbs and flows between the Mensheviks, the Bolsheviks, the compromisers, and like, yeah, it was just going back and forth, and it was almost a miracle that at the end of the day, Stalin, Lenin, and Trotsky were standing on top of the mound at the end of it.
Yeah, it's like that, like kind of Ocean's 11 kind of feeling at the end of it, where they like finally pull off the Great Heist kind of thing, and they're walking through the bank with like millions of dollars or whatever it is. And they pulled it off. It's like it's got that vibe to it, and I think it does for an important reason, because like what I was like talking about before, it's on the trajectory to some type of social revolution, but like it's like the groundwork isn't there, and I think that's where your cooperatives come in. And so let's go to a hypothetical situation where you have, let's just say at one point, 50-50. You have 50% of businesses out there inside this capitalist system, in the yoke of capitalism and all that sort of stuff. You have that versus the other 50%, which is like usual capitalist businesses, privately owned means of production, privately owned corporations and companies and business and all that. If you had 50-50, then you would have a 50% of the population that in their mind would think, hey, this is a suitable alternative to capitalism. And then you would have people that like their common sense would be something along the lines of like, oh, wow, you're in a private company? Or like, we're in a cooperative. Like, oh my God, like kind of thing. And there would be this challenging of the prevailing ideology. And we don't have that at the moment. Like people don't have in their mind any alternative to capitalism. And so to be anti-capitalist, I think you need to develop that ideology. And what you were talking about before is the perfect breeding ground for that. It's not just your, okay, let's, rise up in arms and burn the place down, or even the resistance stuff. The resistance stuff is very important, but like nothing changes people's minds like action. That's a very revolutionary idea. Like, getting in there and getting your hands dirty. And it's not just resisting, but like actually being involved in the new system that you want to take over the old system. And that is being in the cooperative, because if that is the antithesis, if that is being social and a socialist system in and of itself, even if it's like so small now, like 20 years time, 200 years time, whatever it takes, if that is the thing that changes people's mindsets, at that point of culmination of the changing of enough mindsets, that's where you get the takeover, the sexy part.
Yeah. To be honest, if we were to take your hypothetical of 50-50, I can tell you right now, I reckon it's game over for capitalism.
Man, you don't even need 50-50 yet. 100%.
Yeah, because the final point that I wanted to talk about was the knowledge commons. So this the ideas of taking private property and spinning it on its head, like inverting it on its head, it's already out there. So let's take intellectual property. So obviously that's the idea of, hey, I'm a private capitalist firm. I want to innovate with my my research and development department. I feel like I should get some privilege on all of this technology or these innovations that I've invested time in. A minimum, I should have 8 years or a decade where I have this sort of technology to myself. And if anyone wants to use it, they have to pay me a price. Now, the whole point of the knowledge commons is, oh, okay, you have this person that wants to work on scientific discoveries, new software that people should focus on, and basically wants to share this with the world. But doesn't want a private company to take control of this knowledge. Well, this is where the knowledge comes in. There's actually specific platforms such as patent left, copyright left. I think it's BioIOS. Yes, it's biological open source, which that's more scientific based, but you basically, whether it's 3D printing, any type of software, you basically put this software or these blueprints on these open source patents, where it's the whole point of the patent is it is impossible, it is against the laws of those countries, or at least the internet, that people can actually take that knowledge and try to make it into private property.
Yes.
There are already concepts out there that it's already focused on collaboration and
Mm, mm,
cooperation,
mm, mm.
where people just genuinely want their labor of love and they want to kind of share it with people.
Yes. And that is anti-capitalism right there.
Mm,
It is something that directly stands in opposition, diametrically opposed, and flies in the face of that cornerstone element of the capitalist system, which is
mm,
private property. It is, if you can completely undermine and undercut that key element, that key foundational, like that cornerstone, and destroy the idea of private property by making something completely available to all people, and then it just loses all of its meaning, private property.
mm.
Because like people will go for that alternative if they can freely access it and they can freely choose to do it. And that is, if we can kind of surmise this whole conversation now, that is being anti-capitalist, standing completely on the other side of private property, the way and the means of controlling and concentrating wealth,
Mm,
and keeping that in the hands of a few so they can
yeah.
keep on producing more of it, which is what capitalism is.
Mm,
Anything that undermines it as beautifully and almost poetically as that idea right there, that is anti-capitalism. And so to be anti-capitalist, then I guess if we've had those three kind of principles that
mm.
we've been dealing with, which is liberty, equality, and
Fraternity.
property or fraternity kind of thing,
Yeah.
that's the missing element. We've been talking about mainly, liberty, equality, property. The element missing really is collaboration,
Yes.
fraternity, coming together, brotherhood.
Mm,
Or that's, like that kind of collaborative element is the one thing that should be reinforced or re-added to the liberal framework in order to be truly anti-capitalist.
but just to kind of end on this point, I kind of feel like that's the reason why they called it the knowledge commons. Because almost to go full circle with some conversations that we've had, is that um, democracy wise, or at least and also environment wise, we started to go we started to go downhill when the tragedy of the commons happened.
Mm,
And for them to call this the knowledge commons is almost poetic justice, because
mm,
in order to fight against private property, you're making what is basically the peak of speculation, the peak of capitalism, which is, creating intellectual property, creating patents. You're basically going to them and saying, yeah, I have this idea, but I want everyone to have it. It's
mm.
not for you.
Yeah, yeah. Take that.
Well, I think that that's probably a good point to end on. And as always, we close out the episode with what's that synthwave art? And this week, the prompt was taking down the I'm sorry, anti-capitalism, taking down the system. And I think it kind of took me a little bit too literally there, where it's a guy leisurely looking at a stereo system for whatever reason.
Yeah, very good.
Sometimes I love AI art. Um,
Uh,
okay, and with that, hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to close this out, I'll leave it to you, Miss Ray.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and to all of you out there. Please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.